In 1948, a warship prepared to attack Tel Aviv. The only thing standing in its way was not an army, but one man. He lived as a ghost in the heart of Beirut, a spy posing as a simple taxi driver, operating completely alone. His mission was impossible: find the enemy vessel and sink it before it could strike. Failure meant certain death in a hostile land. Success meant saving a nation. This is the story of Isaac Shoshan, a man who gave up his identity and risked everything in the secret war he waged for Israel's survival. Your support matters. Like, subscribe, and leave one comment. Thank you. Isaac Shoshan was a man whose life began in one world so he could master another. His story starts not in the fields of a kibbutz or the streets of Tel Aviv, but in the ancient, bustling heart of Aleppo, Syria, where he was born in 1924. He was raised in a Jewish family, yet his world was quintessentially Arab. His first language was Arabic, spoken with the unblemished native accent of the city's alleyways and markets. This was not an academic skill learned from books. It was the rhythm of his childhood, the sound of his home, an indivisible part of his soul. This profound duality, Jewish by faith and Syrian Arab by culture, granted him an extraordinary and dangerous gift. He could navigate two worlds that were set on an inevitable, violent collision course. His identity was not a simple label, but a complex tapestry woven from threads of both cultures. This unique upbringing, forged in the very crucible of the Middle East, would become the unshakable foundation of his legendary career in Israeli intelligence. In 1932, when Isaac was just a boy, his family made the momentous journey to British Mandate Palestine. They settled in the port city of Haifa, a vibrant but tense hub of coexistence and conflict. Here, the abstract dangers of the wider world became a daily, tangible reality. The young Shoshan witnessed firsthand the escalating tensions between the Jewish and Arab communities. He saw the desperate, existential struggle of his people to carve out a safe harbor in their ancestral homeland. It was here that a deep understanding took root within him, a clarity that few of his peers possessed. He knew that to survive, the Jewish community had to do more than build walls and carry rifles. They had to understand their adversaries, to think like them, to move among them unseen. His motivation was not born of political ideology, but from a visceral personal drive to protect his family and ensure his people would never be defenseless again. This powerful conviction guided his path, and in 1942 he joined the Palmach, the elite strike force of the Haganah. Within the ranks of the Palmach, Shoshan was more than just another dedicated soldier. He was a puzzle piece that fit a lock no one else could open. Visionary commanders like Yitzhak Sadeh immediately recognized his singular potential. His perfect, unaccented Arabic and his innate understanding of Arab culture were not just personal attributes, they were strategic assets of immense value. He was the ideal candidate for a new, highly secretive unit being formed within the Palmach's intelligence branch. This unit was the Syrim, later known as the Arab Section, or the Shahar, a name that means dawn. This was the genesis of the Mista'arevim, the famed undercover operatives trained to live, breathe, and operate as Arabs deep behind enemy lines. For Shoshan, this was not merely a new assignment. It was the ultimate expression of his entire life's experience, a calling that demanded he weaponize his dual identity for the defense of the nation yet to be born. He and his comrades were driven by a profound sense of purpose, a belief he later articulated with stark clarity. He said, "We saw ourselves as the shield of the state, and we knew that if we did not do what we were doing, there might not be a state." But before he could become a shield, he had to be forged into a weapon, a process that would begin with a brutal lesson in the cost of failure. The path to becoming a ghost began not on a battlefield, but in quiet classrooms and dusty training grounds. For Isaac Shoshan and the handful of men selected for the Palmach's Arab section, the training was an education in erasure. It was a rigorous, all-consuming process designed to strip away every trace of their former selves. They were taught to shed their Jewish, Hebrew-speaking identities like a second skin, to bury the person they were beneath layers of a meticulously crafted new existence. This was more than simple acting or mimicry. It was a fundamental rewiring of the soul. Their curriculum was a masterclass in the art of disappearance. They spent countless hours mastering the subtle musical dialects of Arabic, spoken in Damascus, Beirut, and Jerusalem. They learned the proper cadence of Islamic prayers, not just the words, but the physical postures and the deep, cultural reverence behind them. Instructors drilled them on the unwritten rules of village life: how to drink coffee, how to haggle in the market, how to show respect to an elder, and how to tell a convincing fireside story. They memorized long passages of the Quran, understanding its central role in daily conversation and thought. The ultimate test was the creation of a legend. This was a cover story so detailed, so interwoven with verifiable facts and plausible fictions, that it could withstand the most intense scrutiny. It included a fabricated family history, childhood memories, and a network of supposed friends and relatives. This psychological transformation was absolute. The goal was not for a Jew to pretend to be an Arab, but to become one in thought, dream, and instinct. A hesitation at the wrong moment, a flicker of uncertainty in the eyes could mean death. Shoshan's first taste of the real-world stakes came far too soon, and it was devastating. In 1941, he was a young but promising operative assigned to the ground intelligence team for a daring mission codenamed Operation Boatswain. The objective was ambitious: to send a team of 23 Palmach commandos by sea to sabotage the vital oil refineries in Tripoli, Lebanon, then under the control of Vichy France. Shoshan and his unit were responsible for reconnaissance and providing support from the shore, the unseen eyes and ears for the main assault force. The mission was a catastrophic failure before it even began. The boat, named the Sea Lion, set sail carrying 23 of his friends and comrades, along with a British liaison officer. It pushed off into the Mediterranean night, filled with explosives and the hope of a generation fighting for its future. And then it vanished. No distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. The sea simply swallowed them whole, leaving behind a void of unanswered questions and profound grief. The loss of 23 of the Palmach's finest in a single night was a national trauma. For Shoshan, it was a personal crucible. The silence that followed the boat's disappearance was the loudest sound he had ever heard. The tragedy seared itself into his soul, forging a new operational philosophy in the fires of loss. It was a brutal, unforgettable lesson that courage alone was not enough. Victory in the shadows demanded absolute perfection, meticulous planning, and an almost sacred sense of responsibility for the lives of your comrades. This early failure would shape every decision he made for the rest of his career. Despite the heavy burden of this loss, or perhaps because of it, Shoshan drove himself deeper into his craft. He channeled his grief into an unwavering focus, perfecting the skills he would need to succeed where others had failed. He undertook numerous pre-state missions, slipping across invisible borders into hostile Arab towns and villages. He moved among the people, his accent flawless, his mannerisms convincing, gathering critical intelligence on militia strengths, arms depots, and political sentiments. With each successful infiltration, his confidence grew, and so did his legend. In the clandestine world of the Yishuv, he became known by his cover name, Abu Siam. This was the identity he lived and breathed during his operations, the persona that allowed him to walk unseen among his enemies. He was proving a revolutionary concept in intelligence warfare. The Mista Arev was not merely a commando in disguise for a short-term raid. Shoshan was pioneering the role of a deep-cover strategic asset, an agent who could remain in place for extended periods, building trust and weaving himself into the very fabric of the target society. He was, in effect, laying the foundational bricks for what would one day become the operational doctrine of the Mossad, the famed Israeli intelligence agency. His work demonstrated that the most valuable intelligence came not from fleeting incursions, but from patient, long-term immersion. It was a new form of warfare, a tactical innovation built not on firepower, but on Shoshan's own immense courage, psychological fortitude, and unique ability to adapt and disappear. As the British Mandate crumbled and the fires of the 1948 War of Independence began to burn across the land, Shoshan would be called upon to undertake his most audacious mission yet, to disappear completely into the heart of an enemy capital. In the crucible of 1948, the newborn state of Israel was fighting a desperate war for its very existence. Every day was a battle for survival, and intelligence from the north brought news of a grave new threat. Reports confirmed that the Lebanese Navy had acquired a German vessel, the Arjirio, and was secretly converting it into a formidable warship in the heavily guarded port of Beirut. Its intended purpose was nothing short of terror. The ship was being outfitted with heavy artillery for a single devastating mission: to sail down the coast and unleash a merciless bombardment on the civilian populations of Tel Aviv and Haifa. Such an attack would not only cause catastrophic loss of life, but could also shatter the fragile morale of the young nation. With its own navy still in its infancy and no conventional military options available, the Israeli High Command was faced with an impossible problem. Their solution was equally audacious and desperate. They turned to the Palmach's elite undercover unit, the Mista Arevim. The objective was stark in its simplicity and staggering in its difficulty: infiltrate Beirut, locate the Arjirio, and destroy it before it could ever leave the harbor. For this near-suicidal task, two of their finest operatives were chosen: Isaac Shoshan and his trusted partner, Gamliel Cohen. The transformation was absolute. Isaac Shoshan ceased to exist, and in his place emerged Abd al-Karim Mohammed Sidki, a Palestinian refugee ostensibly fleeing the violence that had consumed Jerusalem. The creation of this new persona, or legend, was an exercise in meticulous detail. His forged identity papers were flawless, weathered to appear authentic and carried with the casualness of a man who had possessed them his entire life. His accent was perfected, his mannerisms adjusted, and his eyes trained to hold the weary, haunted look of a man who had lost everything. He and Cohen crossed into Lebanon, not as soldiers, but as two more lost souls, swallowed by the massive tide of real refugees. They melted into the crowded streets of Beirut, their true identities and the fate of their nation buried beneath layers of fabricated tragedy. Their first priority was to establish a plausible life, a cover that could withstand scrutiny. They rented a small room and opened a modest kiosk, a tiny stall selling sweets and beverages to passers-by. This provided a legitimate source of income and a fixed point in the community. But their next move was a stroke of strategic brilliance. They pooled their resources and purchased a taxi. The car was more than a vehicle, it was the key to their entire operation. It gave them an ironclad reason to be anywhere in the city, at any time of day or night. It allowed them to map the city's defenses, observe military movements, and, most importantly, listen. A taxi driver is invisible, a silent witness to the candid conversations of soldiers, officials, and dock workers who never suspected their driver was an enemy agent. Life as Abd al-Karim was a relentless test of psychological fortitude. Shoshan was an island of secrets in a sea of unsuspecting people. He was profoundly isolated, severed from his country, his family, and the man he truly was. Every waking moment was a performance. Every polite greeting, every shared joke with a customer, every prayer recited in the local mosque was part of a carefully constructed illusion. The loneliness was an immense, suffocating weight, a constant companion in the bustling, vibrant city. The strain of maintaining this deep cover was a burden few could ever comprehend. His commitment was so absolute that a comrade later reflected on his unique ability, stating that he was the ultimate mista'arev. He did not just wear the clothes, he wore the personality. When he was Abd al-Karim, he was Abd al-Karim. This total immersion was both his greatest asset and his heaviest cross to bear. Day after day, he drove his taxi through the winding streets of Beirut, its engine a familiar hum against the city's noise. He served coffee and sweets from his little kiosk, sharing pleasantries with his neighbors. But behind the friendly facade, his eyes were always drawn to the sea. He continuously scanned the harbor, his gaze sweeping past the civilian vessels, searching for the unique silhouette of the Arjirio, the weapon that threatened to rain fire and destruction upon his home. His patient observation would soon pay off, but identifying the target was only the first step in a chain of events that would push his courage to the absolute limit. Isaac Shoshan's Mercedes taxi became his most effective weapon, a mobile listening post navigating the chaotic streets of Beirut. Under the guise of Abdul Mustafa, a friendly and talkative driver, he was privy to the city's unfiltered thoughts and secrets. His backseat was a theater of conversation, where businessmen lamented, lovers whispered, and soldiers boasted. The real prize, however, was the unsuspecting Lebanese army officers who would hail his cab for a ride across town. With a practiced air of sympathy for the Arab cause and a perfect command of their local dialect, Shoshan would gently steer conversations toward military matters. He learned of sagging troop morale, of supply shortages, and of the political rivalries seeping into the officer corps. These men, loosened by the anonymity of a taxi ride and the driver's agreeable nature, would speak freely about base locations, upcoming maneuvers, and their personal frustrations. Every casual remark was a piece of a much larger puzzle, a fragment of intelligence that Isaac meticulously cataloged in his mind. Later, in the quiet of his apartment, he would transform this chatter into concise, coded messages, transmitting a steady stream of priceless information back to his handlers in Israel. This flow of intelligence gave Tel Aviv a crucial window into the Lebanese military mindset. But for Shoshan, these conversations were a secondary benefit. His primary objective, the one that consumed his every waking moment, lay beyond the bustling city streets. Day after day, he drove the coastal roads, his eyes habitually scanning the forest of masts in the harbor, searching for one vessel in a sea of many. Then one morning, the fruitless search ended. There it was. Moored in the heavily guarded military section of the port, its gray hull stood out against the civilian vessels. It was the Arjirio, a former German ship that was now a formidable instrument of war, undergoing its final conversion. Shoshan's heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of calm indifference. He drove past slowly, his mind a camera capturing every detail. He and his partner Eli Cohen immediately began a new, more dangerous phase of their mission. They dedicated their days and nights to a meticulous study of their target and its surroundings. They observed the port's security patterns, timing the lazy patrols of the guards with a hidden stopwatch. They mapped the sweep of the searchlights, noting the dark pockets of shadow that appeared and disappeared with their rhythmic movement. From different vantage points around the city, they sketched the layout of the pier and the ship's exact position. They noted the shift changes, the delivery trucks, and the routines of the dock workers. The intelligence they gathered painted a clear and alarming picture. The ship was nearly ready for combat. Its cannons were mounted, and its crew was being assembled. The clock was not just ticking, it was screaming. They had to devise a plan to neutralize the Arjirio before it could sail out of Beirut harbor and begin its deadly campaign against the Israeli coast. The plan they formulated was a testament to desperate ingenuity, a stroke of brilliance born from impossible circumstances. It was both daringly simple and incredibly risky. They would destroy the ship with a powerful, custom-built time bomb. But the challenge seemed insurmountable. How could two men smuggle a large explosive device through a city on high alert, past military checkpoints, and into a guarded naval facility? Carrying a suitcase filled with explosives was a death sentence. Their solution was so mundane it was genius. The components of the bomb, including the powerful explosives and the intricate timing mechanism, were carefully packed and concealed inside a spare car tire. To any casual observer, a spare tire was a common, unremarkable object. It belonged on the streets, an ordinary piece of equipment for any motorist. The image they would present to the world was one of two simple civilians dealing with a flat tire, a familiar urban inconvenience. This perfect camouflage would be their key to unlocking the port's defenses. It was a surreal deception. As they prepared their weapon, the contrast between appearance and reality was stark. Two men, looking for all the world like they were about to change a tire, were in fact transporting the means to execute a strategic military strike deep inside enemy territory. Their calm, practiced demeanor was a carefully constructed facade, a thin shell holding back the immense tension coiling within them. They worked in silence, their movements precise and economical. Each wire connected, each component secured, brought them one step closer to the point of no return. The tire, now laden with destructive power, sat innocently in their apartment. It was no longer just rubber and air, it was a vessel of Israeli resolve, a silent promise that they would not allow this threat to materialize. The plan was set, the weapon was ready, and the target was waiting. They had used their minds to overcome the first set of obstacles, turning an everyday object into a key that could unlock a fortress. Now they would have to rely on sheer nerve. With the target identified and the weapon prepared, all that remained was the final terrifying walk into the lion's den. The night of the operation arrived with a suffocating blackness. A new moon left the sky a starless void, a perfect mirror for the dark, oily waters of Beirut harbor. For Isaac Shoshan and Eliyahu Cohen, this was the point of no return. The psychological pressure was a physical weight, a crushing force that threatened to steal the very air from their lungs. They were not a strike team with an extraction plan or a rescue force on standby. They were ghosts, and if they were caught, they would simply vanish, their existence erased by an enemy interrogation room and a hangman's noose. There would be no trial, no prisoners of war, only torture and a nameless grave. Every second that passed was a step further into a world from which they might never come back. As they made their final preparations, checking the timer and the magnetic clamps on the explosive device, the silence in their small room was absolute. Each click of the mechanism, each rustle of their clothing, seemed to echo with the finality of their decision. They shared a look that communicated everything that words could not: a shared fear, an unbreakable trust, and a mutual understanding that they were now bound together by a fate that would either crown them as saviors or condemn them as martyrs. Failure was not a possibility they could afford to entertain. In this crucible of tension, Shoshan's leadership was the anchor that kept them steady. He moved with a deliberate, almost unnerving calm, his hands steady and his gaze focused. He projected an aura of absolute control, a silent assurance that this was just another task, another problem to be solved with precision and discipline. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, cutting through the fear that lingered in the air. He repeated the words that had become his operational mantra, a creed for survival in the shadows. Stay calm. Stick to the plan. We only get one chance at this. It was a simple command, but in that moment, it was everything. Under the deepest cover of darkness, they moved through the sleeping city, their forms indistinguishable from the shadows they inhabited. Reaching the harbor's edge, they found the small, unassuming rowboat they had hidden days earlier. They slipped into it without a sound, carefully lowering the heavy bomb between them. The device, encased in old tires to prevent any metallic clang from betraying their presence, felt like a coffin in their tiny vessel. With gentle, practiced movements, they pushed off from the shore, the boat gliding onto the black water. Every dip of the oars sent ripples through the silence, each splash sounding like a gunshot in their heightened senses. The journey across the harbor was the loneliest imaginable. They were two men, paddling a tiny boat filled with high explosives, moving steadily toward a warship bristling with guns and guarded by enemy soldiers. The sprawling city of Beirut loomed behind them, a world of life and light they had willingly left behind. Ahead lay their target, a dark monolith representing a direct threat to their homes and families. They were suspended in a terrifying limbo, utterly alone, with the safety of their entire nation resting on their steady hands and a few pounds of carefully placed explosive. One mistake, one stray beam from a searchlight, one curious patrol boat would mean an instant and violent end. They navigated with agonizing precision, their eyes constantly scanning the water. The sweeping beams of searchlights from the shore and from naval vessels cut across the darkness, forcing them to freeze, to hold their breath, to become one with the night. They passed the dark shapes of other boats, their hearts pounding with the fear of being hailed. Each passing minute felt like an hour as they drew closer to the forest of masts and hulls in the main port. The air grew thick with the smell of salt water, diesel fuel, and the palpable tension of a military installation on high alert. This was not a battlefield of noise and fury, but one of absolute silence where the slightest error would be fatal. Upon reaching the colossal steel hull of the Arjirio, the true test began. The warship towered over them, a black mountain rising from the black water. Shoshan, a powerful and experienced swimmer, exchanged a final silent nod with Cohen. He stripped off his outer layers, his body tensing against the shock of the cold sea as he slipped over the side of the rowboat. The water was frigid, a chilling embrace that threatened to cramp his muscles. He disappeared beneath the surface, leaving Cohen alone to keep watch, a solitary guardian in a sea of enemies. Shoshan was now in his element, but it was an element filled with a new and terrifying danger. He worked entirely by touch in the pitch black, his hands tracing the cold, barnacle-encrusted steel of the hull. The objective was the ship's engine room, its heart. A breach there would be catastrophic, ensuring the vessel would be crippled beyond repair. Above him, the rhythmic footsteps of a guard pacing the deck were a constant, terrifying reminder of his proximity to discovery. He could hear the faint murmur of voices, the clang of a metal door. Any sound he made, any accidental scrape of the bomb against the hull, would bring a storm of bullets and floodlights down upon him. The minutes stretched into an eternity. With painstaking care, he found the perfect spot below the waterline. He affixed the powerful magnetic bomb, his fingers fumbling with the clamps in the icy water. He checked and double-checked its position, ensuring it was secure. The device was active, the timer ticking away silently, a promise of destruction hidden beneath the waves. His job done, he pushed away from the hull and swam back to the rowboat with the same silent, deliberate strokes. Cohen's strong hands pulled him from the water, and without a word, they picked up their oars. They paddled away with the same agonizing slowness, melting back into the shadows of the city from which they had emerged. Back in the anonymity of their safe house, the adrenaline of the mission gave way to a new kind of tension, the agonizing wait. They sat in the dark, listening, every nerve on edge. The hours crawled by with an excruciating slowness. They did not speak, for there was nothing left to say. They had done their part. Now they could only wait for the outcome, a binary result of total success or total failure. Then it came. A distant, muffled explosion shook the city. It was not a loud, dramatic blast, but a deep, gut-wrenching thud that resonated through the ground, a sound felt more than heard. It was the sound of a steel hull being torn apart from within. Later, a coded message arrived through their clandestine channels, confirming what the sound had promised. The mission was a success. The Arjirio was crippled, its hull breached by the explosion. Water had poured into its engine room, and the great warship slowly settled to the bottom of Beirut harbor. Its guns, intended to rain destruction upon Israeli cities, were silenced forever, submerged in the murky depths. In the heart of an enemy capital surrounded by hostile forces, Isaac Shoshan and Eliyahu Cohen experienced a profound, silent moment of victory. They could not celebrate, they could not cheer, but they knew they had averted a catastrophe, as Shoshan would later write with simple, powerful clarity in his memoirs. "We went out to sea to find the ship. It did not reach Haifa, nor did it reach Tel Aviv. We sank it in the port of Beirut." The ship was sunk, but for Isaac Shoshan, the danger was far from over. His greatest tests of nerve were yet to come, not in the water, but in the crowded cafes of Beirut. With the Arjirio resting at the bottom of Beirut's harbor, the mission was a resounding success. The logical next step, the standard protocol for any deep cover operative after such a high-stakes operation, was immediate extraction. His purpose was served, the risk of discovery had skyrocketed, and it was time to bring him home. But Isaac Shoshan and his commanders in Israel saw something else entirely. They saw not an endpoint but a beginning. He was no longer just a saboteur sent for a single task. He was a priceless strategic asset, a ghost who had successfully materialized inside the enemy's capital. He possessed a flawless cover, an established network of contacts, and an intimate understanding of the city's rhythms. To pull him out now would be to abandon the most valuable intelligence platform Israel possessed in Lebanon. The decision was made, but the choice was ultimately his. He could return a hero, his mission accomplished. Instead, he made the courageous and profoundly lonely decision to remain. He would stay in Beirut, transitioning from a man with a singular objective to a one-man intelligence agency operating behind enemy lines. For nearly 2 more years, Abd al-Karim would continue his life, gathering information, mapping out sensitive locations, and reporting on the political and military climate. This pivotal moment cemented a core principle of Israeli intelligence that would echo for decades. When an agent achieves perfect immersion, you do not pull them out. You let the ghost walk, for as long as the shadows will have him. He had become more valuable than any single mission. Living on this knife's edge meant that danger could emerge from anywhere, at any time. His most terrifying moment came not from the barrel of a gun or the scrutiny of a security officer, but from the ghost of his own past in a bustling downtown cafe. He was sipping coffee, observing the flow of the city, when a man approached his table. The man's face was a vague memory, a half-forgotten image from a different life. He stared at Shoshan with an unnerving intensity, his eyes narrowing in dawning recognition. Then he spoke the words that stopped Shoshan's heart. He said with chilling certainty, "Don't I know you from Aleppo? You are Isaac Shoshan." In that single shattering instant, the entire world constricted to the space between two men at a small table. His training, drilled into him until it was pure instinct, took control of his body. While his mind screamed, his face broke into a warm, dismissive laugh. He looked the man up and down, feigning friendly confusion. Abd al-Karim, the confident Palestinian refugee, responded, "Not Isaac Shoshan, the cornered Israeli spy." He explained calmly that the man must be mistaken, that he had never lived in Aleppo, that his name was Abd al-Karim. He maintained unshakable eye contact, projecting an aura of polite amusement at the man's error. A flicker of doubt, a moment's hesitation, a single bead of sweat would have been a confession. He held his ground with the performance of a lifetime. The man from Aleppo wavered, his certainty shaken by the absolute conviction in Shoshan's denial. He apologized, mumbled that he must have been mistaken, and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd. Shoshan remained at his table for a few more minutes, his hand steady, his expression unchanged. But inside he was trembling. He had stared into the face of his own past, and it had nearly devoured his future. His cover as Abd al-Karim was so impeccable, so deeply woven into the fabric of Beirut, that it produced the ultimate and most dangerous irony. His reputation as a staunch Palestinian patriot, a man who had fled his homeland and now navigated the Lebanese capital with skill, reached the ears of the authorities. One day, he was approached by officials from Lebanese intelligence. They were not there to arrest him, they were there to recruit him. They were impressed by his backstory, his access, and his perceived loyalties. They had a special project in mind for their new potential asset. They wanted Abd al-Karim to use his connections to spy on the Jewish communities in both Lebanon and Syria. It was a moment of supreme validation and supreme peril. His legend had become so real that the very enemy he was spying on wanted to hire him. This was the ultimate test of his nerve and his ability to think on his feet. He was being invited into the lion's den, not as a prisoner, but as a fellow hunter. He had to navigate the conversation with surgical precision. To accept was impossible. It would entangle him in a web from which he could never escape. But to refuse too quickly or without a compelling reason would raise immediate suspicion. Why would a committed Palestinian patriot turn down a chance to strike at the enemy? He gracefully deflected, expressing his passionate commitment to the cause, but explaining that such work was beyond his skills. He was a simple man, he argued, not a spy. He managed the conversation perfectly, turning down their offer with such convincing humility and patriotic fervor that they left disappointed but not suspicious. One wrong word could have unraveled everything. Living under such relentless, crushing pressure required a form of courage far different from that of a soldier in battle. It was not the bravery of a single heroic act, but the sustained, grinding bravery of years spent in absolute isolation, where every conversation was a test and every new face a potential threat. The fear was a constant companion, a shadow that never left his side. He had to learn not to defeat it, but to manage it, to make it a tool rather than his master. He understood this psychological war intimately, recognizing that his survival depended entirely on his mental discipline. He later articulated his philosophy on this constant battle, a lesson forged in the solitude of his mission. He explained it with profound clarity, offering a window into the mind of a deep cover agent. The fear is always there, he said. The main thing is not to let it control you. You control it. You have a mission, and that is more important than your fear. This was the core of his resilience. It was this absolute mastery over his own terror, this unwavering focus on the greater purpose that allowed him to function day after day. It enabled him to continue gathering vital intelligence for his country, to navigate a sea of enemies, and, against all odds, to survive. After years of living as a ghost, the time finally came for Isaac Shoshan to return home. But his life in the shadows was far from over. It was merely entering a new phase. After nearly 3 years of living on a knife's edge in the heart of Lebanon, Isaac Shoshan was finally brought home. His extraction was as covert as his mission, a silent disappearance from Beirut and a quiet reappearance in a nation that had survived its violent birth. The Israel he returned to was no longer a desperate dream, but a fragile reality. A state defended by soldiers on the battlefield and, just as crucially, by shadows like him. He was a hero whose name could not be spoken, whose triumphs could never be celebrated with parades or medals. The man known as Abdul Karim had ceased to exist, and Isaac Shoshan, the ghost, was back among his people. His return marked the definitive end of his life as a deep-cover field operative. However, it was the beginning of a new, equally vital chapter in his service to the state. Israel was building its formal intelligence services from the ground up, and it desperately needed founders. It required men who possessed not just theoretical knowledge, but the scars of real-world experience. Shoshan, with his peerless understanding of the art of infiltration and the psychology of espionage, was a cornerstone upon which the new Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad, would be built. Inside the nascent Mossad, Shoshan transitioned from the hunted to the handler, from the spy to the spy master. He was given one of the most critical responsibilities within the organization: to find, recruit, train, and run the next generation of combatants, the agents who would follow in his footsteps into hostile territory. No one was more qualified for this monumental task. He understood in his very bones the immense psychological burden of the work. He had lived the profound loneliness, the gnawing, ever-present fear of discovery, and the constant exhausting strain of maintaining a meticulously crafted lie. This intimate knowledge of the human cost of espionage defined his leadership style. He was methodical, patient, and possessed a deep, almost paternal empathy for the men and women he sent into danger. He treated his agents not as assets, but as extensions of himself, preparing them for every conceivable contingency. He led by unflinching example, adhering to a personal code that he would never ask an agent to assume a risk he had not already taken himself. His innovations, born from his own near-fatal experiences in Beirut, became foundational principles. His techniques for legend building, for creating a cover so complete it became a second skin, were formalized and woven into the very fabric of Mossad doctrine. Shoshan's influence became the invisible force behind some of the Mossad's most critical and audacious operations. His wisdom and experience were pivotal during Operation Damocles in the early 1960s, a high-stakes campaign of intimidation and sabotage aimed at halting the work of German scientists who were developing advanced rockets for Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt. An Egyptian rocket program posed an existential threat to Israel, and it had to be stopped by any means necessary. While he was no longer the agent on the ground, his expertise was the critical element that guided the operatives deployed across Europe. He was the master strategist, the unseen hand moving the pieces on a deadly international chessboard. He planned the surveillance, vetted the intelligence, and prepared his agents for the same kind of perilous, high-pressure environments he had once navigated alone. He understood the nuances of operating in foreign cities, the subtle signs of being watched, and the precise moment to act or to retreat. For the agents in Germany and Switzerland, his guidance was their lifeline, a voice of calm authority rooted in unparalleled experience. His monumental contribution was best captured by the legendary Mossad chief, Isaac Shoshan, who spoke of the men of that first generation with awe. Shoshan's words served as the ultimate tribute to a lifetime of silent service. Men like Isaac Shoshan are the foundations upon which the security of Israel is built. They did the impossible when we were at our weakest. Having built the shield he once embodied, Isaac Shoshan's final mission would be to ensure that the stories of Israel's first spies, the men of secrets and deeds, would never be lost to the shadows they inhabited. Isaac Shoshan's life unfolded as a testament to quiet, relentless service. His career was a continuous thread running through the entire history of Israeli intelligence, from the desperate days of the pre-state underground to the sophisticated, globally renowned Mossad he helped to build. The personal cost of this dedication was immense, a debt paid in the currency of his own life. He sacrificed his youth, surrendering his true identity for years at a time. He gave up precious moments with his family, his absences explained away by vague cover stories that hid a world of danger. For decades, he lived under a permanent veil of total secrecy, unable to share the triumphs that saved lives or the fears that haunted his nights. Yet, for Shoshan, this was never a burden. It was a duty, an honor, and the deepest expression of his identity. As an immigrant who had left an Arab land for a Jewish homeland, his devotion to the sovereign state of Israel was absolute and unwavering. He understood a profound paradox, that to keep his home safe, he had to leave it for years at a time. His long, lonely missions were the ultimate affirmation of his relationship with Israel, a constant act of leaving so that he and his people would always have a home to which they could return. In the twilight of his long life, with his field days behind him, Isaac Shoshan undertook one final critical mission. This operation required no disguise and no weapon, only a pen and the powerful weight of memory. He resolved to preserve the history that he and his comrades had lived, a history that was in danger of vanishing with their generation. He meticulously wrote his memoir, Men of Secrets, Men of Deeds, creating an invaluable record of the incredible origins of the Mistaravim. He documented their training, their fears, and their audacious operations, ensuring that the founding generation of Israeli intelligence would not be condemned to the anonymity in which they had served. It was his last great act of service, a way of giving a voice to the ghosts who had secured the nation's future. He wanted the people of Israel to know the names and stories of the men who operated in the shadows to guarantee their safety in the light. Isaac Shoshan passed away from natural causes on December 28, 2020. He was 96 years old, a quiet giant of Israel's generation of founders who had lived long enough to see the fledgling state he protected become a powerful nation. The legacy of Isaac Shoshan is not found in statues or public monuments, but is etched into the very DNA of Israeli intelligence. He was a foundational architect of human intelligence, a pioneer who proved the viability and strategic necessity of long-term, deep-cover operations. The concept of embedding an agent so thoroughly in enemy territory that he becomes part of the landscape was a tactic Shoshan and his peers turned from a desperate gamble into a cornerstone of national security. This approach became a hallmark of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, a defining characteristic of its daring and effective operational style. Shoshan's life embodies the core tenets of that institution: courage in the face of impossible odds, ingenuity when conventional methods fail, and a profound, personal willingness to sacrifice for the collective good. His story is a powerful testament to the idea that the course of history can be altered not only by the clash of armies on the battlefield, but by the quiet, nerve-shattering work of a single individual walking through the streets of a hostile city. He gave Israel the invaluable gift of audacity, instilling a core belief that even when isolated and outnumbered, a few brave people could protect the many. Isaac Shoshan was more than a spy. He was an architect of Israel's security. He belonged to a remarkable generation that did not have the luxury of asking if a mission was possible. They only asked if it was necessary. In the dark alleys of Beirut, on the silent waters of its harbor, and in the quiet, tense rooms where new agents were forged, he dedicated his entire being to serving as Israel's invisible shield. He understood a fundamental truth of his nation's existence. To protect the brilliant light of a new country, some men had to be willing to live entirely in the darkness. His story is one of profound and powerful duality. He was the boy from Aleppo who became a foundational hero of Israel. He was the man who adopted the identity of an enemy to protect the lives of his own people. He was the daring saboteur who evolved into a wise spy master, teaching others the dangerous craft he had perfected. The name Abd al-Karim al-Jamil is a footnote, a ghost lost to history, but the actions of Isaac Shoshan are immortal. He and the men of his unit gave Israel its most crucial and enduring asset: the unshakable belief that it could not only survive but prevail. They proved that the nation could defend itself by striking its enemies, not just at the border but in their very heartlands. Isaac Shoshan's legacy is alive today. It exists in every life saved by a piece of critical intelligence, every threat neutralized in secret, and in the quiet confidence of a nation that knows it has guardians in the shadows watching over it, just as he once did.